Alright, in this video we're going to finally work on something that I think is pretty cool. I mean, everything we've done is pretty cool, but this is especially cool because we are going to implement a mini array list. So remember the array list data structure. I mean, we've talked about it and used it many times, but now we're actually we have enough in our toolbox to actually build one from the ground up. Or at least a very simple one, okay? So what functionality should this mini array list store, or like what should it do? Well, first of all, it should be generic, so we're going to put a type here saying that it can store any type. But what else should it be able to do? Well, I mean, one thing is maybe like retrieving elements for an index I. Let's see. Maybe we want to add things, so we add some value onto the end of the array list. Okay. Maybe we can set something. So like maybe at some index I, we're gonna set some value v. Maybe we can remove something. Okay. So maybe something at index I. And that's pretty much it. I mean, maybe we can overload the add method to, let's say, if we give an index I and then a value tv, this acts as sort of like an insertion, okay? And then, of course, maybe like, getting the size or the number of logical elements in the mini array list, okay? So let's just jump right into it. So the first thing we're going to do is actually make the class generic. So of course we did this with pair, so there's nothing new there. And let's go ahead and start off by writing the like the method signatures, or the headers rather, of what we want this mini array list to do. Okay, so let's say that it returns an optional of type t, and so the get method will, instead of returning null or throwing an error if the element doesn't exist, we will instead just return an empty optional. Okay, so get an element at some index, retrieves an element at the given index. Index is the index to retrieve. Return optional.empty if the index is out of bounds, or optional.of the element otherwise. Okay, so I'm only going to do the Java docs for the get method, and I will leave it to you to do the rest. Okay, or you can read the book. Okay, so for now we'll just say it returns null, and then maybe let's say we're going to say boolean add, and this will, if we give it a value, it will add the element into the mini array list, and it will return whether that operation was successful. Okay, so why is that important? Well, we see that immediately if we try to override the add method, to treat this as if it were an insert. Okay, so actually we'll put this one above this method. And if you're wondering how I did that, that's just Control Shift and then the arrow keys. So up, we'll shift it up one. Down, we'll shift it down one. Okay. So here we'll say something like, if the index is out of bounds, then we return false and we don't add the element. Otherwise, we do add the element into the array list. Okay. So maybe we'll have one for size, which just returns the number of logical elements in the mini array list, and we'll talk about what that means a little bit later. But of course you should be familiar with that if you remember how we've talked about how the array list works and how it resizes at runtime. And let's see, so maybe boolean set, so if the element is out of bounds, or if the index is out of bounds, then we return false and we don't do anything. Otherwise we set and return true. And remove. So boolean remove. So it just receives an index and it returns. Actually, no, sorry. It shouldn't. it should not just return a boolean. It should actually return the thing that we're going to remove, and just an empty optional if it doesn't exist. Okay? So we'll say return false for this, return null for now. So these are all of the methods that we're going to implement. Okay? So now let's write some tests for this. So obviously we don't have a constructor yet, but we don't need one to make this, viable. So what I'm going to do is actually we're going to use the before each annotation once again. Okay? So remember that we showed that off by having we're going to declare a private MiniArrayList. We'll say it has some type integer. We'll call it MiniArrayList1. And let's say we'll create a couple just to try different things. And we'll say maybe this one has points in it. Doesn't really matter. But now we're going to say before each, we're going to have a method called setup. And then we'll just say each one becomes a new MiniArrayList. And we'll just copy this and make them 2 and 3. Very good. And now we're good. So one thing we could also do is actually add some elements to these methods, or to these array lists. But we want to test to make sure the add method actually works. So we actually will need to separately add elements to every element, we will need to separately add elements to the MiniArrayList in each of these methods. So it'll look a little redundant, but that's fine for our purposes. Okay? So now let's actually do that. So we're going to say test add, and so the way that this is going to work is we're going to try to do something like add, and then maybe 15, and of course this should always return true. So if we just insert an arbitrary element, then this should never fail. Okay? Now this will fail if we try to insert into the MiniArrayList and the index is out of bounds. So if we try to insert rather than just add onto the end of the array list, MiniArrayList. So I'm going to say ArrayList and MiniArrayList interchangeably here, but hopefully you get the idea. So assert false, we'll say this dot, we want to insert the value at, let's say -1. Obviously that index doesn't work, so this should return false and not do anything. And then if we try to add or insert into an index that does not exist yet, then it will also throw an exception, or well, not throw an exception. It will return false. Okay? So all of these should return false, and I'm only going to test it for one of them, because if it works for one type, because it's generic, then it should be guaranteed to work with any other type. Okay? So that's test add. Now, of course, all these will fail at the moment, but that's fine. So this also tests, let's say test add and insert. Okay? So, and we don't have a method called insert, and that's fine. We don't really care. We're just testing the functionality of insertions and additions. Okay? So now let's test the set method. Okay? So setting an element will, of course, just replace an element at a given index. So let's add a few things to, and let's only do it with the MiniArrayList1 just for the sake of time. So let's say -3, 150, 81, and we're going to keep these as assert trues. We're not going to remove the assertion here, because we want these to fail if the add method doesn't work. Okay, so this kind of also inevitably tests how add works, but in order for setting to work, adding must also work. Okay, so they're not mutually exclusive, or rather, setting relies on adding work being functionally correct. Okay, so but what will return false is if we try to do something like so this should be a set. So, or let's do a, let's make a comment here. So set into MiniArrayList. So the first 4 lines here are just like setting up the elements that we want to be in the MiniArrayList. Okay, so obviously a set for index, let's say 2. If we set that to be, let's say 281, then that should work just fine. And then maybe assert false of -1. Of course, that would be impossible. If we try to do index 4, that would also be impossible because that index doesn't exist. So yeah, okay. So now let's test the remove method, and again we'll just use the same insertions here. So remove from MiniArrayList. Now we're going to change these to assert equals because remove actually, well, removed an element from the MiniArrayList, so there's a side effect that happens, and it also returns the element if it exists as an optional. Okay, but before we do that, let's actually also test the size. Okay, so if we add or insert or set anything, then the size should change or update accordingly. Okay, so we're first going to assert that the size of the array list is 0. So the expected is 0. If we add 4 elements, then the expected should be 4. Now actually I'm just realizing that like what I'm wanting to do is to test whether insertions, sets, or removals or additions change the size. So actually we will do this one after. So we'll come back to that. Okay. Well, actually we can just go ahead and finish it. It's fine. So we add 4 elements, and then that returns that. If we insert an element, then we want to say like assert true of this dot MiniArrayList1 dot add. Let's say index 1. We'll make that 1000. Then the size should of course become 5. And then so let's just separate all of these just to make it clear like what's going on. Like we have some modification, and then we check the size. So now let's do a set. So of course that should do nothing. Yeah, okay, so yeah, we'll fix these. Okay, so if we set something at like 1, then this should be assert true. So we change element 1 to be 150, but the size should not change. And if we remove, let's say the let's say that we remove index 1, or the element at index 1, that would be like removing the value 1, or sorry, the value 150, because we just set it to be that. And now the size should be 4. Okay, so that takes care of additions, insertion, settings, and sets, and removals. Okay, but now to actually test removals, we're going to change these to be so these will of course be optional.empty, because we're trying to remove from the an index that doesn't exist. And we're just going to say we're going to change these to be remove from index -1, remove from index -4, and then this will be remove from index 2, and then this will return an optional of -3. Okay, very good. So remember that before each, we'll make sure that these are all cleared out before we before any of these are executed. Okay, make this a test method, and I mean we'll just run it just for the heck of it, and everything will naturally fail, but that's perfectly fine. In the next video, we will actually implement all of these methods.